Trump's tax cut or his payout for your silence? That and beyond Trump's 100 days. For Korean Americans, it's the 9,125th day since the LA riots. And now there's another Asian African American problem brewing in Philadelphia concerning Chinese takeouts. Takeouts? That's right, takeouts. That's next on Emil Guillermo's Takeout. Hi, everybody, and welcome again to this show we like to call Emil Guillermo's Takeout. We serve it up, you take it out. I'm Emil Guillermo, your host, and you might ask, why amok, Emil? Well, the short story is that for nearly 15 years, my Emil Amok column was a staple of Asian Week, what was once the leading Asian American weekly in English in America. Amok was the name of my compilation of essays that won an American Book Award. And Amok is on my driver's license, not indicative of my mental state. And what do you know? It's also the name of my solo one-man theater show. I should say, coming to the San Diego International Fringe Festival, June 23rd through 28th. It's called Amok, the Amok Monologues. What else? Now, the column is home-based on the website of the Asian American Legal Defense and Education Fund blog. That's at ALDEF, AALDEF.org/blog. Check it out, and if you like what you see and hear, ALDEF is a 501c3. Go to the donate button. It's tax deductible. On this episode, we remember the 25th anniversary of Saegu. That's Korean for 429. Sort of like when you say 9/11 and how you know it changed your world. Well, for Korean Americans in LA, 429, Saegu changed their world. The LA riots 25 years ago. We'll hear from the perspective of John Lim. He's a community leader who was in the thick of it 25 years ago, and he blames it all on misperceptions about Korean immigrants on the part of the African American community there. In this episode, I also talk about the takeout issue in Philadelphia, and as it turns out, it's another Asian African American issue that could very well blow up. The man trying to be the peacemaker in Philadelphia is Councilman David O., who coincidentally is a Korean American. Now, O has another interesting story. His cousin, In Ho O, was killed 59 years ago in Philadelphia by a gang of black youths. And the story was well publicized back then, but it's a story that few people remember or even know about. And we're going to tell you about it in the interview I do with Councilman O. It's the way his family dealt with it that became newsworthy back then, and it could very well be newsworthy now, as it provided answers back then and could help with current Asian African American problems now. And then on a personal note, as we begin Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month, I think about my cousin Stefan, who was gunned down on May 3rd, 2014. And it's helpful to review David O's cousin's story. It's helpful. It deals with forgiveness. But first, a little takeout on the news. Dr. David Dow decided to not shriek on. I guess he didn't want to let it drag out. But I'm still shrieking. David Dow didn't need 100 days, neither did United. Its CEO, Oscar Munoz, continues his apology tour in the media. And now there's a new report that his company has done internally that says changes are coming in service, including increasing the bumping fee from $1,350 to $10,000. Remember, they could offer up to $1,350. They never did. But now they're saying, hey, if we're going to bump you at $10,000, we're maxing out more. Dow's settlement amount hasn't been disclosed. Frankly, I would have dragged it out in the media, what with court delays and every story accompanied by that shrieking. I mean, there's a doctor being treated like a sack of rice, for United, not wanting to hear that and see that as the court case went on with discovery and the trial. How many millions do you think it was worth for United? So in some ways, good for United, but not necessarily good for the consumer, because now the pressure is off of United to live up to its word. I mean, there'll be some pressure, but they bought off Dow. I'm frankly still going to avoid United. I have successfully done so for the last 5 years, and I live in a United hub. Look, I'm not calling it a boycott. It's a choice. And my choice is not to go with United. United paid off Dow. It hasn't begun to repair the trauma that I've experienced just hearing Dr. Dow. It hasn't begun to repair how that incident made me feel about them as an airline. And so for now, we're left to wonder if David Dow will benefit from that Trump tax plan. Oh, the Trump tax plan, just part of that pre-100-day buildup. The obsession over Trump's 100 days is quite natural. It's a round number checkup. The first benchmark we have to contemplate the big question: did America make a mistake electing Donald Trump? Or maybe it was all just the conservative Filipinos and conservative Vietnamese. I don't know. But of course, most of us knew that it was a mistake on November 9th, and there's no political morning after pill. So more than an arbitrary thing, the 100-day window lets everyone get a chance to give the victor the benefit of the doubt and let him show us that he's legit. With 100 days, it's even rigged in favor of the president. Mind you, the honeymoon phase is when the president's capital is said to be at its highest, largely because he hasn't screwed up yet. Rightfully, then, we can expect the 100 days to give us a good sense of the absolute best an incoming president can do. In other words, it's never going to be any better. This is it. Which makes it troublesome that as we approach the 100th day, or if you listen after 100th day, we're in it, the best we can say is, can we get an annulment? No, there's no annulment. No, here's what can be said. Trump knows how to be a boss. He just doesn't know how to be president. He knows closely held family businesses and is all too willing to appoint the inexperienced family members he has to high posts. Democracy, well, it's an alien notion to Trump, like his tower. He likes to be the big bully above it all. With 3 immigration executive orders held up in federal court, 2 on travel bans, 1 on sanctuary cities, it's clear he doesn't know the limit of his reach, nor does he know the Constitution. Now, his tax cuts are like his public payout for your silence. Raising the standard deduction for individuals may put a few $100 in your pocket, but it's nothing compared to the corporate tax cut, and supposedly it's all made up by growing the economy at 3%. Now, you notice no one wants to talk about trickle down, but it's just a variation of trickle down economics. And over the last 30 years, we've already learned that trickle down theories don't work well in practice. Cutting taxes on the rich so they reinvest in jobs and it all magically trickles down throughout the economy is a nice fantasy, but it doesn't work. Not if companies merely use cash to buy back shares and pay out the top execs. The plan enriches the 1%. And for all the rest of us, well, not much. And it practically guarantees the growth of a budget deficit, putting the country in the red if the fantasy doesn't come true. Now, couple all that with Trump's huge military budget and his 100-day penchant for using missiles in Syria and Afghanistan like he's trying to outdo Kim Jong Un, and you see where this could all be heading. World War 2.5, 2.75. It's just not the middle class. He's not thinking of the middle class first, let alone America first. The tax cut, look, is bad policy. Don't let it be the Trump way to buy your silence. It's not like a money-back guarantee. Besides, your vote in our democracy is worth way more than a tax cut. So resist. Don't settle for simplification. Insist on tax fairness. Trump said in his campaign he'd raise taxes on the rich. Well, make him live up to that. Either that or it's just another Trump lie, a typical flip-flop like we've seen in the first 100 days. From China to trade to NATO to his bad appointments to his aggressive military stance without congressional approval, the president has done more in 100 days to discredit himself than to reassure us in his presidency. Hence, my grade for Trump, an F. And that doesn't stand for Filipino. And if you still believe, like Trump, that 100 days doesn't matter, well, it does mean this. America still has a healthy sentence remaining for which there is no parole. You can mark it on the wall with chalk, but it's better to simply act up and resist. After April 29th, we've got 1,360 days left. So much for 100 days in Los Angeles. There's another anniversary, 25 years, or 9,125 days later after the LA riots. In Korean, the phrase being used is Saegu 429. It's the date most Korean Americans will never forget. If you were in Los Angeles, you were at ground zero. They call it a riot. They call it an uprising. There was plenty to be upset about. The Rodney King verdict, which acquitted 4 police officers caught on videotape beating King, was a flashpoint, but it also allowed a community to vent about everything else, including the case of Latasha Harlins, a 15-year-old girl who was shot and killed by a South Korean store owner. Soon Ja-do, the liquor store owner, was convicted of manslaughter, fined, given 5 years probation, but no prison time. And even though the jury suggested Do get 16 years, the community was left with nothing. That, combined with the King verdict, is said to have triggered off 6 days of unrest that left 55 dead, 2,000 injuries, 11,000 arrested. And it was the Korean American community that bore the brunt of the outrage. The Korean Churches for Community Development, KCCD, is in partnership with KoreanAmericanStory.org, have released a set of videos for the anniversary, and I was taken by the first one by John Lim. Lim was the president of the Korean American Bar Association at the time, and he says Korean Americans, by virtue of their businesses in the African American communities, were misperceived by the media and the public as reaping economic benefit from the African American community and not giving back. Now, because of that, Lim says Korean Americans were unfairly victimized during the riots and were harshly treated in the aftermath when liquor licenses were taken away and families not compensated. The KCCD commemorative service is one of the many to be held this weekend in Los Angeles at the Oriental Mission Church. You can go to the website at www.saigu, that's SAIGU 429.org. There's also going to be special presentations at USC and UCLA. But as I said, I was struck by Lim's memory of what happened 25 years ago. Here's Lim from the Saigu Project of KoreanAmericanStory.org.
That was 1992. I became the president of the Korean American Bar Association. Well, leading up to that, there were a number of cases that actually affected Saigu. Most people don't know this, but there was of course, the Rodney King case that everybody knows about. But before that was another case that really elevated the tension between the Korean Americans and the African American communities. And that was a case involving a young African American girl. I think her name was Latasha Harlan. I forget exactly how old she was, maybe 14, 15. And she was shot to death by a Korean American woman, Sun Ja-do, Sun Ja. And that became, a huge issue and created tension. And the incident itself was tragic, for both communities, no question about it. But the judge that found her guilty for a lesser crime and then basically no jail time with some probation really, I think, produced outrage within the black community, African American community. And that, of course, preceded the Rodney King case, and when the Rodney King case happened, it basically erupted. And of course, your typical Korean American doesn't really appreciate the slavery, the social injustice and racism that our African American brothers and sisters suffer from for literally 4 centuries. And so Korean Americans were just pointing fingers at the African Americans. And of course, African Americans were pointing fingers at the Korean Americans because a lot of the small business owners were in their community and, making a good income without really being involved in their community and giving back. So, long story short, the tension basically erupted, and unfortunately, the Korean Americans were victimized for the way our society is and the way the system has failed both communities, in a sense. When the verdict came down and riot began, I was looking outside the window from my office. I'm on the 28th floor of the high-rise building in downtown. And as the day was getting darker and darker, you can see the fire flames across the city of LA. And from my office, I had the view to the west side and the south, so I can really see where the riots were really happening. And so I called my friend, who was the vice president of the Korean American Bar Association at the time, Angela Oh, and we talked. We said, this is a time for Korean American lawyers to come together, mobilize, and we should do what's right. And that is, of course, to be the voice for the Korean Americans, victims especially, and see if there were legal services that we can provide to alleviate their pain. So fast forward, and probably within weeks, I'm not really sure, it's so long ago, we put together a pro bono team of lawyers. And numbers, my recollection is that 80 plus Korean American lawyers in the city of LA came together. We mobilized to have essentially an ad hoc law firm to help the victims with issues that range from, small business loans with banks, insurance coverage, leasing, landlords saying you still got to pay rent, your store burned out, but you still got to pay rent. And so there's a whole host of really legal issues that we dealt with, and we had different lawyers with different area of expertise dealing with these issues. One example I can point to you is that the city of Los Angeles had a moratorium on reissuing what is known as the alcoholic beverage license, also known as ABC. And apparently there was some study done about how the small liquor stores in the South Central area was contributing to the crime and unemployment rate and so forth. And that, of course, most of these owners at the time were Korean Americans. So the moratorium essentially would have prevented, and did in fact prevent, the small business owners from reacquiring their ABC license after rebuilding their store. And of course, these stores relied heavily on the revenue generated from the sale of alcohol. And so the Korean American merchants and store owners thought that that law would just basically wipe them out and devastate them. But the African American political leaders were strongly in favor of the moratorium because they felt that the liquor stores were doing more harm than good. And so, this is a very complex social issue, and I wasn't there to be a sociologist or a political analyst. I was there as a lawyer. And so, my position was that if you take away something that's already inherently theirs, there has to be just compensation for it. And the city was refusing to do it under the police power to compensate them, and they said that they had the right to not compensate and prevent the reissuance of licenses. And of course, we're all forgetting the fact that if the small liquor stores are not there to sell alcohol, then somebody else will. And of course, then the big boxes came in, the major supermarkets came in, and of course they sold liquor. They sold beer, hard liquor. The core of the problem is the abuse of alcohol. But of course, like in so many cases, you got one minority group pitted against another, and the Korean Americans actually lost that battle. And the value of their business declined immensely. They still had loans outstanding that was based upon a revenue projection because of the alcohol sale. But it is what it is. At the time, we were being called upon for a lot of things. So at our board meeting, we would look at all these things that we need to do, and we would identify the best person within the organization to represent the bar association. And so when the Ted Koppel Nightline assignment came to us, we naturally picked Angela because she's a feisty advocate and a very good one. So Angela did a fabulous job for us on Nightline. I did a number of debates with the African American political leaders, the likes of Jesse Jackson, Maxine Waters, and so we had different people going to different things. There were some CABA members who spoke Korean well, would deal with the Korean media. It was a very hectic time. I spent more than 75% of my working hours doing pro bono work in 1992. There's a lot of unsung heroes in this, and I think more with the younger Korean Americans, whose heart is more, focused on helping the victims, wanting to see social justice, and not necessarily seeing it as an opportunity to become famous. First of all, I don't see Saigu as a product of the tension between the African American community and the Korean American community. It's really the result of the African Americans, the blacks, just getting really, really fed up with the social injustice in this country. And yes, Korean Americans got victimized more so than any other group. Largely, as I said earlier, I think because of the media going after the Korean Americans leading up to this Sunjadu case, and the general perception that the Korean Americans were reaping economic benefit from the African American community without giving back. We saw in Baltimore another riot recently, not too long ago, and so is it a repeat? I think so. Much smaller scale because it is a smaller city. But look, after more than 2 decades, it happened again, and so it's really more of a fundamental issue about the social system and the equity that we need to have in our society. So I actually met with George H.W. Bush, because of the Saigu, and there was an opportunity to raise issues. And initially I thought it was a small gathering, and so I said I would go if it was a small gathering because I would have a chance to articulate our concerns and our issues. But when I got there, it was more than 30, 40 people, and it kind of turned out to be a political showcase, so I was really disappointed. But in any event, I did have a chance to make my point. I still remember the point I made to the president, which is that the Koreans are recent immigrants. Most of us came in the 60s and 70s and 80s, and this is 1992, so that statement would have been very accurate. We don't have the responsibility for the social injustice that occurred 400 years ago. But we're the number one victim from this LA riots. And in a sense, my point to the president was the government has the responsibility to address the social injustice so that we don't become victimized for something that we didn't participate in. I mean, it's logical, it's rational, but how do you go about doing something like that? Well, I think it takes innovative, strong leadership. And that's what we were hoping for. And, I'm hoping that the next generation will see this country being more focused on equity and social justice.
John Lim, an attorney based in L.A. who was head of the Korean American Bar Association at the time of the riots. And those were his memories of that story 25 years ago. He mentioned Baltimore, and coincidentally, we have another situation possibly brewing in Philadelphia, an Asian African American situation. This is called Emil Amongst Takeout, and that means we have a soft spot in our heart for Chinese takeouts. In Philadelphia, takeouts are under siege by overzealous cops who ticket them mostly unfairly for being open after 11 p.m. at night. I mean, this is a thing. It's happening. And I talked with David O., a Philadelphia councilman, about the situation. Are Chinese takeouts no different than the Korean liquor store owners of Los Angeles 25 years ago? Now, O talks about that, and he also talks about his own personal story of his cousin beaten to death in 1958 walking through Philadelphia, and how the story of his cousin, In Ho Oh, motivates him in racial disputes to take the high road by rejecting revenge and offering forgiveness. David O says the Chinese have now organized and have bought guns, and that it's getting dangerous. We begin talking about how it all started, with home invasion robberies of Chinese homes by mostly African American perps. It sounds similar to the LA story in a way. And and how the black community felt the Chinese were taking advantage of their community.
What happened is that there were a rash of home invasion robberies that targeted Chinese takeout restaurants, mainly in poor neighborhoods. And from that, we had hearings, and from the hearings, the question arose, are you working with the police? And then we learned that many of these restaurants felt that the police were antagonistic towards them, that they could not get service from the police, that they reported crimes and other types of problems, but the police did not respond. On the other hand, they did complain that police were coming to shut down their restaurants, their takeout restaurants, and issuing them fines up to $2,000 merely for being open past 11 o'clock. These are not all police districts. They're only certain police districts. Mm-hmm. And so when we looked into it, we found that there's an ordinance that basically says commercial establishments that sell items, be it consumed or used off-premises, should close at 11 o'clock, and they specifically stated takeout restaurants. The law is vague because it states on a residential block face, but the definition of a residential block face, which, by the way, may exist in a commercial corridor, which doesn't make much sense, is complicated. And so the other portion is that it was actually primarily being enforced against Chinese takeout restaurants, which is odd because, what is distinct about Chinese takeout restaurants other than they serve Chinese food? Yeah. So we basically looked at the civil violation notices that the police were issuing. First of all, we're wondering why the police are doing this and not licensing and inspections, L&I, which normally would enforce this type of law. But we found through our research that in 2015, 96% of the civil violation notices and fines were issued to Chinese takeout restaurants. And the following year, like 85%. It's a huge percentage of CVNs that are issued to only one type of business and owned by Chinese.
Yeah, one of the things that you mentioned earlier, you said, so this whole thing started when the police were looking into home invasions in this area?
Yes, there are a rash of robberies where criminals would basically go into Chinese takeout restaurants where many of the families lived upstairs because they're not wealthy. Many of them are poorly educated. They don't speak English. Kick in the door, break in the house, put a gun to someone's head and say, give us the cash. And what we learned is that they're barely making it at all. But what they do have is they have cash on hand because they make their purchases almost on a daily basis, whether it's shrimp or vegetables, whatever it is, they go out on a daily basis to buy food because their stores are small and they cannot buy and do not purchase like frozen items for long periods of time. They buy their food relatively fresh and then they pay their rent in cash. So they have that on hand. Why that is a concern to us is because when someone puts a gun to someone's head or they want money, if you don't give them money and they don't believe you, people get hurt. And, the problem is if they're hurting your children or your spouse or someone and you truly don't have any money because they think you have money and you don't. So that's a very scary situation.
But wait, David, are these people, did the police ever catch the perps? Or did they solve any of these home invasion crimes?
Yes, they have. So let me say that I don't blame the police for the most part because basically police officers didn't sign up to shut down small Chinese takeout restaurants. And they do try to serve the community, and they have been very helpful in trying to address home invasion robberies. However, a police officer is told by superior, go out and close down this restaurant because it's open past 11 o'clock. They show up like it was a crime scene. Shut down your restaurant. Why? Well, because you're open past 11. And even when, in many cases, where the Chinese takeout restaurant owner has shown them that a judge has dismissed the case because they're not a residential on a residential block face, they are still issued a $2,000 ticket, and people are ordered out of the restaurant, out of the takeout restaurant, and the owners are threatened, the family threatened with arrest if they don't close their shops.
Well, let me get back to the home invasion thing. You said that the perps were arrested. Was it an Asian on Asian crime? Was it kind of an inside community job?
No, it was primarily people from the neighborhood, in most cases African American, that were targeting these Chinese takeout restaurants under the belief that they had a lot of money. In fact, there was a rap song that became well known in the Chinese American community because it was basically an instructional on how to rob a Chinese home.
And this was what being circulated on YouTube and that kind of thing in the community.
Yes. So the community was upset, and as you can imagine, it created a impression in the Chinese American community, the home invasion robberies, the complaints being targeted under this law, that there was animosity from the African American community against them.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. They got the perps, and so initially the thing that got people outraged about this, the home invasions, that's sort of solved. But when I was looking at some of the news accounts of what's been going on there, they mentioned drug activity. I didn't know anything about the home invasion, but this idea that there were drug activities at the stop-and-go beer places. How is that connected to this?
The incorrect impression that Chinese takeout restaurants are a reason or a magnet for criminal activity. That is not true. There's no evidence of it. There may be individual stores or restaurants that have criminal activity. Some of them may be nuisance businesses which should be closed. However, from the store owners, their complaint is that, when they have criminal activity and they call the police, they don't get a response, and then they're being held responsible for the criminal activity because of what is happening outside of their takeout restaurant. But in the cases that we've looked at, there's been no complaints of criminal activity, simply the fact that the restaurant is open past 11. And, when we talk to certain people, not all people, some people, they are of the belief that Chinese takeout restaurants attract crime. And they just kind of immovable in that conclusion, even though they cannot, provide any evidence of that.
Maybe they attract crime because at 11 o'clock or past 11 o'clock, criminals are hungry, and so they have to eat somewhere, I guess.
Well, the problem is that they are closing the Chinese takeout restaurant, but next door is the pizza place, and they're not closing the pizza place. There are 7-Elevens, which are a convenience store that are many times open 24/7, and they're not closing those. Dunkin' Donuts, they're not closing those either. And so in many parts of the cities, there are businesses open past 11 in what would be identified as a residential block face under this ordinance, and none of them are being closed. But once you go out into certain neighborhoods, they're only closing the Chinese takeout restaurants, despite the fact that they are right next to other businesses or bars or other things that are serving food or providing products that people use outside of the store. And so, one, the law is vague. Number two, it's almost entirely being enforced against Chinese takeout restaurants, which we don't even identify as being a basis for any type of criminal activity.
So it seems that maybe there are people who have some muscle who are maybe directing the cops to enforce an existing law, or I don't want to start a conspiracy theory or anything, but...
Yeah, no, I think that's the problem. In other words, it's very difficult for people, to, if they call, illegal dumping happen outside their home, or even when there's some drug activity or suspicious car, it's very difficult in an urban area to get police to come out because they're just busy with so many things, let alone they're going to come out and close a takeout restaurant. It's not really kind of law enforcement area. And so it would take someone with enough influence to contact a police supervisor to get a officer out to actually shut down, a Chinese takeout restaurant, because it's just not high on the priority list. And so the problem with that is, in addition to being vague and de facto discriminatory, it's not something that any citizen could do. You'd have to be somewhat connected in order to even make this happen. And so these are problems because the police have basically the power to arrest people who don't cooperate. And they're not familiar with the licensing and inspection code, and therefore they're not the right agency to do this in the first place. So there are many problems related to the fact that the police are enforcing this law.
We're talking with David O., who's a councilman at large in Philadelphia, about what's going on with the takeouts, the Chinese takeouts in Philadelphia. And I this story kind of got to me because my show is called Emil Guillermo's Takeout, and I have, when takeouts are being discriminated against, I have to be concerned. But, originally, David, this story, or the law, had a kind of common sense angle. When was it overtaken by racism? I mean, the idea of maybe after 11 o'clock, you don't, in a residential area, you don't do business. But now it seems like racism, like you said.
Yeah, what we've said is this, listen, if it's a truly residential neighborhood and people have an expectation of peace and quiet, then fine, let's make sure that the businesses are closed, but let's close them all. And if there is a law that is going to be applied, and apply it fairly and evenly and through the right agency. But if there isn't any evidence or basis to close a business, then targeting Chinese takeout restaurants does not seem to even be logical. I think where this arose from is maybe in the 1980s when there were stop-and-goes and beer delis, and some of them were problematic with serving alcohol and people urinating outside. There was an adverse reaction in Philadelphia and other urban areas to these type of stop-and-goes that were starting to grow and proliferate. This law probably was created to answer that type of a problem, but it was created after the stop-and-go problems were somewhat resolved. And so when it came out, the thing that it seemed to have been directed towards are Asian Americans, because they look like the same people who run the stop-and-goes, and because the people don't speak English and they are behind bulletproof glass. And so for a very small percentage of the population in the neighborhood, I would say, They targeted the Chinese takeout restaurants, and it gave them some level of satisfaction, and I think politically just stayed there.
Yeah.
What I have said to the Chinese takeout community, most of them are from Fujian. They're poor. Like I said, they don't have a lot of education, and they've been very surprised by this and learning about the fact that this law is applied to them, and they didn't know it wasn't applied to other people. What I've said to them is that, contrary to what you think, this is not the African American community against you. This is a very small percentage of people, and I believe you will find no better friend, no better ally than people in the African American community, because they are fully aware of what these laws are. They're discriminatory laws. And so I went and talked to the head of the NAACP here in Philadelphia, the Guardian Civic League, which is the African American police officers, and I just met with the president of the Black Clergy of Philadelphia, and I'll meet their executive committee next week. But all three of them have said that this is discriminatory. It appears to be discrimination to them. And so we are now going to arrange a meeting of the Chinese Takeout Restaurant Association, because they had to form an association with all these problems, and create a meeting between them and the civil rights leaders in the African American community. And I believe we'll be able to forge a relationship whereby the black community and its leadership and the Chinese American community, particularly the restaurants, will be able to work together towards resolving this discriminatory ordinance and its enforcement.
See, now what you've just described is really a kind of, the grassroots effort to try to bridge some differences or bridge the divide that exists now between a lot of different people in our society now, which I think is commendable. Yeah.
No, thank you. But let me be clear. I think it is a perceived a difference, or while there is a lack of communication, interaction, culturally and otherwise, I think what the real problem is that people in charge believe that there is a lot of support for this law in the community. And I would say that that is not true. Mm-hmm. And I've put that to the test by going out to different groups, particularly African American groups, who the leaders are just surprised to even hear we have this law. They never heard of it. They didn't see it. It doesn't affect them. They didn't know about it. But when they hear about it, they're very clear that this is discrimination. What if it were all Jamaican stores or Nigerian stores or African American stores? I mean, it's clearly de facto discriminatory, and its vagueness and lack of clarity and lack of sense and lack of evidence makes it very, very suspect. And so I think that what we'll be able to show is that, in fact, the African American community does not support this law. And when we show that, when we together show that, any persons who think that their support for this type of discriminatory law will find that there isn't, and therefore they will not continue to support its existence, and will be able to amend it, and will be able to ensure that it is enforced properly by the proper agency,
so
whatever the new law may be.
Yeah, so you're working within the council trying to maybe change the law, or grant an exemption for the Chinese restaurants? Is that a possibility?
No, I think what we're trying to do is clarify the law. We don't want to grant exceptions to anyone, because then somebody else may be subject to the discriminatory law. We want to amend the law so that it's clear exactly what its purpose is, and we ensure that we don't have these strange definitions of a residential block face within a commercial area. Yeah. If you're in a commercial area, then there is not an expectation of, for example, going to sleep at 10 o'clock. I mean, basically, you're in a commercial area. There's all kinds of things open. That's why you're in a commercial area. And so we want to clarify the law, and then we want to ensure that the law is enforced fairly, broadly, and by the proper authorities or agency. And so an amendment of the law is important, and then we want to repair this perceived discrimination that the Chinese American community or Chinese immigrant community may feel exists in the black community, and the black community may feel that exists from the Chinese takeout community or the Asian community. And I think that when we're able to work together to resolve a problem of discrimination because it's discriminatory, we bring people closer together, and we work together and create a better society. And I think it will be, and I hope it will be, a positive result at the end. But we're still working on it. But the work so far has been very good in the community. The political side of it has been problematic, because the political people are perceiving that voters want this law. Mm. But when the voters show that they don't want a discriminatory law, it resolves the problem.
So a lot of people, the police say they deny it's discriminatory, and I'm just curious about what the look of these restaurants. I mean, I'll show pictures of some of these places, and a lot of these places are very common on the East Coast. When I lived in Washington, D.C., I used to see these places a lot, and they don't look like they'd be terribly appetizing, but because there's usually a bulletproof glass thing where they serve you the food, right?
Yes. Let me say that for the most part, and I'm trying to be as objective as possible, for the most part, by and large, people in poor communities, they don't have a lot of money, and the Chinese takeout restaurants are actually well received. You can go there late at night, you can get something to eat, it tastes good, it's actually pretty fresh, and it's very inexpensive. And so there is not a lot of complaints about the Chinese takeout restaurants, and that's been the comment almost everywhere I've been talking about this. The other thing is that we're talking about a population that is from another country, doesn't speak English, has like a third-grade education, is very poor. They cannot just go out and get a job. They don't have health care. They don't have benefits. What they can do is talk to some people, find a cheap business, and they're very cheap, and they start cooking food and selling, and they go out every morning buying, the items that they need to cook it. They make a very marginal amount of money just trying to make it week to week. It's not an enviable life. But if you shut them down, where will they go? What are they going to do? So that is one of the really serious issues. And as you know, our country has a rather bad history of dealing with Asian immigrants, particularly the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, whereby people of Asian descent could not go overseas because they couldn't get back in, yet they could not become naturalized citizens. And so they were left to basically pick up the most menial jobs that was out there, which has over time in America created a stereotype that Asian Americans are very weak and very subservient and very indifferent and not kind of community-minded. I think that's really a problem. And so, what we've really tried to do is look at this law and say, however you feel about these people, whatever your perceptions are, this law is discriminatory, and everyone should be against discriminatory laws, particularly as Martin Luther King said, an injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And we've had very good responses about that. And I think, more positively, when African Americans and particularly non-Chinese come out to strongly support these people, I think it is a very good representation of what America is, what we hope to be, and the fact that, African Americans are going to lead the way in this. Yes, I'm a councilman, I'm doing this work, but I'm really going to African American civil rights organizations and clergy groups and to the mosques, and I'm asking them, what do you think about this law? And they say it's discriminatory. And with that, I think we'll be able to build a good relationship between our Chinese and Asian American communities, our African American communities, in a stronger manner. Yeah. And so I think that will be the positive result of this. I hope it will be.
Yeah, at the same time, you still have people being ticketed. The police are going in there, and I was reading one article about how one woman just collects all her tickets for the month and then goes and has them reduced or has them thrown out.
Thrown out by the court.
Yeah, they're like parking tickets, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a big problem. Let me say that as an attorney, the problem is also this. The city does not send witnesses to these hearings. Basically, a city worker or representative shows up with a big box of civil violation notices and just shows them to the judge, and then the judge is supposed to find the restaurant owner in violation based on a ticket. That is inadmissible. You need to have a live person. And for the most part, they are thrown out, but we've seen a couple of judges basically make a decision based on what's written on the civil violation notice. I'm sorry to say that I don't imagine how they passed the bar or went to law school. Mm-hmm. You can't find against someone based on hearsay evidence, but it's even problematic that the city would proceed in that manner, not having live witnesses. And so they don't want to call the police officers then, but they want to bring a box of civil violation notices. Mm-hmm. We've had situations where when a restaurant owner has shown the police officer that they were found to not be a commercial block face, that the police officer then wrote 3 violations of that same night. The violation is for being open after 11 o'clock, but giving 3 civil violation notices with a $2,000 fine to each one of them is a $6,000 fine in an evening. And we could only say that now that is a problem where we can blame the police officer. Okay, now you're trying to impose your will, you're doing a wrong thing, and that becomes a problem.
So what is happening now with these? They still get the tickets. They still get thrown out. This is just going on like clockwork at 11 o'clock, it seems, every day, despite your good efforts?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, like I said, it's not every place in Philadelphia. It's just certain police districts, and it really kind of depends on the captain. But I think the more that we raise this and the more that the community speaks out against it, the less it is going to happen.
How about as far as the tension in the community? Is this creating a kind of tension that could lead to maybe even an even greater misunderstanding or even violence?
Yes, because what has happened, because of the home invasion, robberies, and other things, there's a group within the Chinese takeout restaurant community that have become gun owners, and they are very much promoting gun ownership for self-defense. And a number of the restaurant owners, being fearful and looking at these situations, they of course want to protect their families, and they have every right to buy a gun, and so they have bought guns. On my part, I have simply said that gun ownership is a big responsibility, particularly if you have children. Second of all, it's not so easy to deal with criminals, by getting your gun and loading it with bullets, and if it's already loaded, I mean, where are you going to put it? And heaven forbid you actually shoot someone, and now you may be prosecuted, and you will have a lot of reaction from the community. On the other hand, look, you do have a right to get one, and I'm not going to say don't get it, because I'm not going to say that. You're an adult. Make your decision if you feel fear for your family's safety and whatnot. But I just really discourage it, and hopefully we will be able to make your family more safe by working better with the police, securing your locations, working with the community, and trying to overcome some of these really adverse and negative stereotypes. But when people in our government have these beliefs and act upon them, it certainly doesn't help. It certainly tells community members that, yes, they are a problem, yes, they're a source of crime, yes, they're a pariah in our communities, and yes, they should be singled out. And I think that is a problem. They are oftentimes targeted because people believe they're isolated. They have no friends. They're easy victims. And that's something that we don't want to do.
Is on a scale of 1 to 10 now, because a lot of people, when I talk to them about the takeout problem in Philadelphia among the Chinese takeout owners, a lot of people just sort of, they didn't yawn, but they weren't aware of how significant this was. So on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you put it where this is? Because it's been going on for some time. People are being harassed,
Sure.
And now people are alarming themselves.
Yes. Yeah, what I would say is this. If it's not you, it probably doesn't matter at all. Mm-hmm. But if it's you, it matters a lot. For example, I run into people and they say, oh, yeah, no harm, no foul, when someone is wrongfully smeared and their reputation's ruined. I said, yeah, it doesn't matter to you unless it's you. Then it matters a whole lot. And so we can look at situations where, for example, people have been singled out under the law to ride in the back of the bus or use another water fountain or put a Star of David on their windows. And I'm not saying it goes to that level. All I'm saying, it's in the same category of ordinances when you begin to target people for discriminatory negative punishments that are not applied to others. And the only thing that we can find is because of their race, the Chinese lettering on the outside of their store, and that he happened to be the takeout business. No government should allow that type of thing, and it is a very slippery slope. And so I think it is a big deal. And I, as an elected official, certainly cannot allow that to happen in my city. And, unfortunately what happens is, the Chinese takeout restaurant, the population, they are relatively new. They are uneducated. They don't vote. They don't have a lot of friends. And so they become easy targets. But that's why it's important for us to deal with this seriously, because, easy targets of discrimination make for very bad situations.
We're talking with David O., Councilman, Philadelphia, about the Chinese takeout issue. He mentioned how some Chinese takeouts are even arming themselves. It sort of segues into a discussion I wanted to have on guns and violence, because when we first met over the phone, it was about your cousin in Ho-Oh, who was killed 59 years ago, 1958.
Yes.
And we did a story, I covered a story about how you had a street, 36th and Hamilton, which is where your cousin, who was then a 26-year-old grad student from Korea, going to Penn, was beaten by 11 youths, mostly African-American, while mailing a letter. Mm-hmm. And it's a story that stuck with me. This was no guns were used right here in the.
Yes, he was beaten to death with fists and pipes and bottles.
And so all of this brings up all the different kind of hate crimes you might think of, or crimes against Asians that have come subsequent.
Yes.
It's not exactly Vincent Chin. There are some things that resonate when people think about Vincent Chin and they think about In Ho-Oh.
Yes. The critical thing, or the key thing about In Ho-Oh, as you know, but I'd like to tell the listeners, is that the family petitioned for leniency for the boys that murdered their son. They're a very religious family, and they believe that forgiveness was a way to not only give meaning to the death of their son, but also give meaning and hope to those murderers. That was, in a sense, very well received by people, the Christian perspective that they brought, but it also angered a lot of people, and my father, who was the uncle to In Ho-Oh was living with him at 36 in Hamilton when he was murdered, had to move out of Philadelphia because of death threats, because of the act of kindness and the Christian act. My father became a pastor, and he was a very religious person as well, but, people were very upset that they asked for leniency, and that they used Christianity and tried to express themselves in that manner. And please remember, this is right after the Korean War. There were a lot of American soldiers and military who died in Korea, and so it was a very sensitive time. But the parents of In Ho-Oh and my father and mother and other family members, they made a decision to raise money for the rehabilitation of the murderers, and they asked that their son be buried here in Philadelphia as a way of keeping a bond of remembrance. And at that time, there was a very close relationship between this small Korean community, very small, and the African American community, and so there was a very good relationship that was formed out of the unfortunate and tragic circumstances.
So one of the things, just to clarify again, this act of forgiveness was accepted by some, but was also reacted to with hostility by others, who, I guess, because they wanted to use the death penalty against the African American kids. Who was angry? Was it the Asian American community?
Yeah, as far as I can tell, I mean, it's hard to piece together. But I think while some people really praised, O's family for their act of forgiveness and Christianity and kindness, and it was written about in Time Magazine, Life Magazine, and other periodicals, there was also a group of people that were very offended, and I think they were probably racists. They probably were very offended that these Asian people, yellow people, dared to present a view of Christianity that involved forgiveness, and it was probably in their minds the worst type of thing, very, very wrong kind of thing to do. They should stand up for the death penalty and punishment of criminals, and so they probably were very offended that these Korean or Asian people expressed a commitment to Christian values.
Yeah, because I was taken by that, because that's one of the things that, we know about the relationship between, blacks and Asian Americans and poor communities when, store owners. I mean, the anniversary of the LA riots is coming up this year. And then not enough people know about the story of your cousin. And I think it could be instructive at this point to go back and say, here's a guy in 1958, and here was your reaction from a Korean American family about how to deal with this. Yeah, one other thing about your cousin's story that resonated with me, and I mentioned this to you when I first talked to you, that we're coming up to the third anniversary of the murder of my cousin, who he lived in the South of Market in San Francisco, entered an apartment that he thought was his, and was gunned down by an African American who, actually he was an African immigrant who, was, I believe he was a naturalized citizen, but he was a former security guard, had a gun, and with one bullet, as my cousin entered his apartment by mistake, shot him dead. And we have a law here, or there's a doctrine known as the Castle Doctrine, which allows people
protect your home,
protect your home, and to shoot if you feel threatened. I made a big stink about the law, and that they arrested the man, but then ultimately had to let him go because no prosecutor would touch a case where it was really governed by the Castle Doctrine and the kind of self-defense laws we have in the United States. And it's all kind of the basis of stand your ground, and then the tough laws of self-defense that exist. But I took something from your cousin's story in that while I was against the law and wanted something to happen because of the law, because innocent people can be killed, I was struck by the forgiveness aspect of the story, and as I gave the eulogy for my cousin, I know that trying to reach that point was very difficult, but ultimately something that I had to do, and so it was comforting to me to hear the story about your cousin and how your father and your family reacted. So.
It
works.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Yes. Let me say that, we have all had or will have the very strange experience when our father or mother dies, and how heartbroken we are because that never happened to us before, that people will come up and say, I'm very sorry, my father died 10 years ago. And it's odd that it is comforting, because I found it comforting when people said to me, I'm sorry, my mother died. And what I found comforting about it was that there are other people walking around me every day that went through the same thing, and here they are, and they're sharing with me, that level of grief, and I kind of looked at people differently from that point on, and so I think that the death of In-Ho-Oh and his family, the value of it is in giving you comfort and your comfort, despite the tragedy that you suffered and the pain you went through. will be of comfort to someone one day. And it's unfortunate, but it's also very valuable. We don't know what will happen to those people, but, you'll be able to share something with them that will get them through, that very difficult and painful time. And if they can forgive or at least resolve, they may not pick up a gun and go out and shoot somebody, because of what happened. They might not seek that kind of vengeance.
Yeah, well, I know that forgiveness doesn't solve everything, but it does settle and does bring you back to some level of sanity, and in that way, it's helpful. The case of my cousin still remains one of those open cases that they'll never solve. The ironic thing is they know who the killer is, and they won't do anything about it. But I don't know if there's anything we can do about it except to maybe advocate for better laws in terms of, controlling guns, or at least maybe there could be something when people make mistakes. I mean, it's not really, it's not even secondary manslaughter for making a mistake because that castle doctrine is so strong. So anyway, I wanted to bring that up because I was touched by your cousin's story to that degree. And I guess every day you pass 36th and Hamilton and see that sign that memorializes your cousin, and the street there is named for your cousin now, it must make you think of him all the time.
Yeah. After all those years, all those many years, there's a little something there that really speaks of, the value not only of his life, but the value of forgiveness.
Well, it's important, and I hope that, I guess, your cousin's story probably resonates when you think about Asian-Black relations now with the Chinese takeouts.
Yes, and let me say that that story, which is known in the African-American religious community, is a reason why I can go and speak to the church leaders. I'm not completely a stranger. They know the story. They've heard the story. And I become a good ambassador of bringing people together.
David O., Councilman at Large, City of Philadelphia, a Korean American using a different approach to fighting de facto discrimination in his city. His attempt to bridge it all with understanding. He's using his cousin's death of 59 years ago as his motivation. It's the power of forgiveness. That power of forgiveness, it's plenty powerful. I'm thinking about it myself after my cousin's murder in San Francisco 1,095 days ago. Emil Guillermo was gunned down May 3rd, 2014, when he entered the wrong apartment by mistake. The resident was armed, shot my cousin with a single bullet. I've written about it on the ALDEF site. You can go to the link. And I've been waiting for the DA to call me up and say, hey, we're going to go forward, but I know that's not going to happen. A story like In Ho-Oh's offers some comfort and guidance, though, as we approach May 3rd, 1,095 days after his murder. In these key anniversaries, we remember, as we approach Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month, just how easy it is to slip into an unwitting divide-and-conquer mindset. But no one wins if we take the bait and fight each other. After hundreds of days and all these painful instances where the poor are pitted against the poor, maybe our best options always come down to this: empathy, understanding, and forgiveness. And that's our program. Hey, we're on iTunes. Please subscribe, rate, and review. Tell your friends about the show. Share a link. You can contact me on Twitter at Emil Amok. Get all my other contact information there. Or go to the ALDEF blog at www.aldef.org/blog. Give us your feedback at my personal site, www.amok.com. That's right, amok.com. You can even leave a message on SpeakPipe. You don't need a phone. If it's audible, we'll use it, just like in talk radio. And once again, if you like what we do or like what you're reading on the blog, share the link, tell the friend, go to the ALDEF blog, hit the donate button if you're so moved. aaldef.org/blog. ALDEF, the Asian American Legal Defense and Education Fund, is a 501c3, and your help is tax deductible. Once again, thanks for listening to Emil Amok's Takeout. I'm Emil Guillermo.